Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We have Ryan Grimm on. He's going to talk about Charles Booker in Kentucky, who is challenging the Schumer Democratic pick in order to go up against Mitch McConnell and is gaining a lot of ground, really has a shot there maybe to pull off that upset. He's also going to talk about the Elliot Engel, Jamal Bowman race. Is Jamal Bowman the next AOC? That is shaping up in an interesting way as well. So that's Ryan. We also have Kyle Condick on. He is going to be talking about the Biden Veep stakes and the way that that has sort of shaken up in the light of all these protests that are going on. But we wanted to start today with the Democratic response that is shaping up as we speak.
Yeah, so the Democratic response is really coming together. You saw all of the lawmakers, the heads of the Democratic leadership that gathered in the Capitol Visitor Center to take a knee for George Floyd. But it wasn't just the display that caught a lot of people's eyes. I will let you guess what did and what they're drawing some criticism for. Let's take a listen and watch what happened.
We gather in honor of those Americans and so many others. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Botham Jean, Terrence Crucher, Jordan Davis, Oscar Grant, Philando Castile, Freddie Gray, Walter Scott, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin. Any other names? Members wish?
Judy Allen,
Sean Bell,
Jordan Davis,
Freddie Gray,
Love.
Alphon Taylor.
So what you missed from that, actually, is that a lot of them had a lot of trouble standing up. I wish we could play that for you. But, of course, what's drawing a lot of eyes is the use of the kente cloth in that area. Now, kente cloth is very popular in Ghana. There's no actual explicit stated reason for why it was worn in this particular photo op other than it's a photo op. And, I mean, I don't even know what to say for the fact that they decided to wear this, especially when if you look at how much of the hollowness and how much of it is rhetoric and really just virtue signaling, I think there's nothing better encapsulates that than performatively taking a knee with kente cloth on. And again, I mean, they were criticized from the left. People were like, why are you wearing kente cloth here? Just take a knee.
Of racial justice activists and African Americans were like, what are you doing right now? This is uncomfortable and embarrassing, and don't. And at the same time, look, it'd be one thing if you have the symbolic display, but then you have some real meat on the bone in terms of what you're pushing. Because, look, yes, Trump is the president. Yes, Republicans have the Senate. But you do have an opening right now. There is some interest in police reform and criminal justice reform from the right. There are some real things that you can do. A lot of money goes from the federal government to local police departments and state police departments. So you actually have a lot of potential power here. But the substance of what they are offering in terms of their policing reform bill, I mean, some good reforms, but nothing that's particularly new, different, or transformational. They're talking about the 134-page bill would take numerous steps, including allowing victims of misconduct to sue police for damages, banning chokeholds, requiring the use of body cameras by federal law enforcement officers, restricting the use of lethal force, facilitating independent investigations of police departments, keeping a database as well of police brutality incidents, which is something, look, these are all good things. These are all things that I support. But the approach from Democrats in the House, as is often the case, seems to be to say, well, this isn't really our area. Let's let the local officials, let's let the state officials handle this. We're going to do our performative displays. We're going to offer a piece of sort of symbolic legislation, but we're not really going to go beyond that. We're not going to really address the more structural issues. We're not really going to respond to the activists on the ground's calls to cut the budget to these police departments. We're going to stay in our lane of like symbolic gestures and tokenism is what this appears to be.
That's what the establishments of both parties always do, is they take like real uprisings or they take like real concerns around structures. And then, I mean, this is why I was very critical. And I knew that I was so certain that this is what would happen, which is that it would turn into kente cloth wearing tokenism and, knee bending and then putting some legislation. And look, I don't even know if I haven't reviewed a lot of that legislation, but also what they do is that you talked about yesterday, which is that if this were to be a real thing, then it would have to address the fact that right now 50% of black Americans are out of a job. Nobody is addressing that.
Right.
It would have to, nobody is addressing black home ownership or so much, even in the coronavirus crisis.
Healthcare disparity.
The healthcare disparity right now in the black community versus everywhere else, and we've covered the coronavirus and how it impacted. I mean, George Floyd himself, the autopsy revealed that he had coronavirus whenever he was murdered. And so you can see over and over again that these structural things are being papered over. And you're also seeing, I mean, smartly, politically on their behalf, they're trying to push back hard against the defund the police movement. And we saw that a little bit with Politico reporting that on Capitol Hill, the House Democratic leadership is trying to quash the defund the police movement. That came at around the same time that the Biden campaign. And I thought that this was, particularly just shows how Biden lags behind the news cycle, right? So you have an entire, 2-day period in which defund the police becomes one of the major discussion points on the American left and in the Democratic Party. AOC, other people are calling for it. Minneapolis acts. How does the Biden campaign react? They put out a statement from their spokesperson. So this is what came out in the middle of the day. A long, kind of very carefully checked question. Biden does not believe the police should be defunded, as hears and shares the deep grief and frustration of those calling for change, and is driven to ensure justice is done, and that we put a stop to this terrible pain. So then, after they write this statement, they make sure that it's all packaged, correctly. He allows himself to be questioned on CBS News to directly address this. Let's take a listen to what he said.
Do you support defunding the police?
No, I don't support defunding the police. I support conditioning federal aid to police based on whether or not they meet certain basic standards of decency and honorableness, and in fact are able to demonstrate they can protect the community and everybody in the community.
That's, directly calculated.
Literally means nothing also.
How do you
nothing.
quantify honorableness?
It's just
please, somebody tell me.
A bunch of word salad gobbledygook
right.
to sound like you're signaling some alliance with the activists, but you're breaking from them, and it doesn't really ultimately amount to anything. I mean, look, Politico had a good write-up of the way that all these Democrats are like, oh, we don't support defunding the police. And I would respect it more if they actually came out and articulated what they meant by that. And look, my whole radar today is on the defund the police movement and what I think is good and important about it. So I'll get into some of those details there. I would respect them more if they were upfront, but I think they're just afraid of the words. Like they're afraid of the Republican attack ad. So they don't want to explain their position really at all here. So their move is, rather than kind of justifying, no, we don't think you should cut police budgets.
Right.
We think that the massive amount of money and the growth in police department budgets, we think that that's appropriate, and here's why. Rather than making that argument, they're saying, oh, we don't have anything to do with that. That's all state and local governments. We don't really have anything to do with that, which is a lie. Look, the federal government, same thing that they do with education, right? Local schools are handled locally, obviously, but they get a lot of money from the federal government. And so you use that as a tool, as both a carrot and a stick, to enact the changes and reforms that you want. I think a lot of those reforms that have come from the federal level, frankly, have been disastrous. But you can't pretend like you don't have power over the amount of money that is going to these police departments. So again, it's just very cowardly. They want to symbolically gesture that they're with it. They want to use it for their own political gain, but they don't actually want to be responsive to what activists on the ground are pushing and are saying that they need, that would change the dynamic outside of these just sort of, incrementalist reforms, which again, I support. I think everything that they offer here is good. I think if it passes, which, we're not seeing really any signs, and we should say this too, Republicans haven't offered anything.
It's not going to pass.
Anything. So at least they're offering something, incrementalist as it may be. But I think there's just a tremendous lack of courage and ability to articulate what their actual position is. They just want to blame shift.
Yeah, no, look, that's exactly what it is, which is they don't actually have principles. They have no principles on this matter. They want to co-opt this in order to try and use it to accumulate more political power so that they can just do what they want to do for their corporate donors, regardless of what the situation is. And I think that that's ultimately where this entire thing is headed, and where the Biden campaign in particular, them at the leadership of the Democratic Party, as the Democratic nominee, Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer and people like Chuck Schumer. And you saw that display. You see the way that this is going to be channeled. And I think that that is very much how you can see the movement. And at the same time, I mean, we have to remember who Biden is, right? Which is that, and you know, one of our producers found this clip, and it's, I mean, this shows you like very much the aid of Biden. Now, look, I don't actually disagree with Biden, but that's probably a problem if you're a Democrat. Let's take a listen to his tune on police reform back in the 1980s.
In a nutshell, the president's plan doesn't include enough police officers to catch the violent thugs, not enough prosecutors to convict them, not enough judges to sentence them, and not enough prison cells to put them away for a long time.
Yeah, what happened to that guy?
Joe Biden is literally the most prominent Democratic architect of mass incarceration and the current model of policing. That is a big part of his legacy. And you don't have to go back to 1989. I mean, right before George Floyd was murdered, right before the protests kicked off, Charlemagne the God pushed him on that 94 crime bill. What do you think about it? Hillary Clinton says she's sorry for supporting it. And he said, Hillary is wrong. And here's why it was great. I mean, completely unrepentant. So that is always important to keep in mind. Yeah. No one should imagine that Joe Biden's instinct is to be a great ally on these issues. Now, I think he's trying to somewhat evolve. He's trying to grab onto some sort of symbolic gestures, some sort of reforms, like the type of things that, you know, the Obama-era task force came up with. And I want to be clear, those incrementalist reforms are better than nothing. And they are comfortable for the donor class, right? Jamie Dimon and Mitt Romney and Bezos and all those people, like those types of reforms, more body cameras, even independent prosecutors, demilitarizing the police. There is actually a financial constituency that would oppose that. So you may not see demilitarization coming, you know, as strongly forward as some of these other reforms. But a lot of those reforms that are comfortable for the donor class and are comfortable for the Democratic elites and establishment are good things, are things that would make a modicum of improvement. But what activists in Minneapolis and other cities in the country are finding is that a more dramatic structural approach is required when you have places like, you know, Oakland, California, where 40% of their budget goes to policing, where you've had 50% population growth over the past 40 years and 170-some% of growth in terms of policing budget, where there's actually no evidence that more cops on the street lead to lower crime. So they don't want to deal with any of that. They certainly don't want to deal with any of the economic issues that, you know, that are unifying, that would deal with some of the reason that this part of society is seen as an underclass to be policed rather than protected. They don't want to deal with any of that. These reforms are something, but I think they are cowardly in trying to pretend that they don't have a role here to play, trying to ignore the activist claim and just shift the blame to the state and the local level.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get more into this, but I think that it's smart politically what he's doing, just given the public polling and given how much of the country actually feels about this. And we should remember, I mean, it's funny, Biden did win the Democratic nomination through the media, through Obama and all of that. But I mean, the man seems to have a decent actual pulse of his upper middle class white liberal base. Yeah. I think that's exactly where they are right now. And that's the constituency which is going to carry him to the White House. And so we should not underestimate his own political acumen in this way, because we were talking about this earlier. He's the ultimate political creature. Whenever it was convenient to be anti-police, like pro-police, like he was pro-police. When he was anti-immigration, like he was anti-immigration. Like he's a shapeshifter, a neoliberal shapeshifter. You know, he invented it before Pete Buttigieg really perfected it. And I think that is something.
Well, that's who he's creating a bridge to, Saagar. Don't forget. Don't forget. No, look, I think there's a lot of concern about, like, oh my God, the Republicans are going to cut some defund the police ad and it's going to be terrible, et cetera, et cetera. I actually think politically, the fact that activists have staked out a sort of maximalist position and Biden can say, well, I don't support that. You know, here's where I am. Right. I think politically, that actually works pretty well for him.
Space for him. Yeah.
My critique, I mean, I have a lot of critiques. I want him to go further, certainly, but there's no specifics here. Like, what he said means nothing. So at least people do want to see some real reforms, even if they are in the more incrementalist range. And he's not even offering that at this point.
I think that's a good point.
All right, we're going to tell you what's on our radars. That's next.